all other lines will run by default. Now, we have a piece of code in app.py that starts our entire application. If you're importing it elsewhere and you run that, it'll start your entire application for a second time when you import it. And that'll cause problems. We don't want that to happen. To avoid that, we write the code that should be executed when your application is executed. Only when you run Python app.py, only when you run this, whatever code must be executed, that is the code you write within here. So when this file is imported, that won't be executed. That's the whole purpose of this. I hope that makes sense. I hope that so far makes sense. Now, let's start with this. Let's go ahead from to Flask. Let's take from Flask, import Flask. Now, let's start with this. First thing that we need to know when we start with Flask is within Flask package or framework, you have a class called Flask. This class is what you need to import because the first thing we do here is create an object of this class. So let's do that. Let's create an object of this Flask as app equals Flask of double underscore name double underscore. Now, this is a common thing that we write or common way that we create a Flask application by default. We create a Flask application under this entire app.py. So this is just create object of Flask class that will help run your entire application. This is what we do. Now, once this is done, you just do app.run. That's all. Now, let me just break down this code to begin with. This is going to create only an app object of this Flask app. It does not start your application. You start or run your application in this logic because when somebody else imports app.py, automatically the app should not run again. So that is why that particular code is written here. So to create a Flask application and run, you have only 3 lines. Import the Flask class, create an object, and just use object.run. And that's it. We are done. That's it. So when you perform Python app.py, there you go. It says serving Flask app. The name is app. Debug mode is off. We'll worry about that later. It says it gives a warning. This is a development server. Do not use it in production deployment. Use a production what WSGI server instead. It says that, but let's not worry about production servers to this extent. Right now, let's not worry about it. And it's running in this IP. So this is the local host, which means it's running in our PC, our computer. So this is an application that keeps running. Whenever you hit this endpoint, whenever you access this endpoint, you will be able to access this Flask application. You want this application to do something, hit this endpoint, it'll perform that application or it'll perform whatever you want. That's it. You can press Ctrl C to quit. This is your very simple and basic Flask application. If you want to do with Fast API or with Django, as we talked about earlier, it becomes quite complicated. Hence, we are using this. All right. So I hope this so far makes sense. If there are any queries still here, please feel free to ask. I know Flask is new, and I know Flask is new to some of you at least, and I understand that some of you might have some queries on it, like what is the purpose of it, or what are we doing with this, or any such thing. Whatever is a curious cat that's running through your mind, and if you want to get it off of your mind and ask about it, please feel free to do that. I'll just give you a few seconds, and then we'll go to the next part of using this Flask application.
So I guess I'm curious what kind of task.
To no queries, I suppose.
Can you hear me?
Right. In that case, let's move ahead and go to the next part of this. Now that we have started our first Flask application, the problem is it's not doing anything. We need it to perform some operation. So let's do that. Let's make sure that we have this Flask application
I
perform
think
some operation at least. Let's do that.
I think Jenny had a
So
question.
first things first. In
Hello,
this
can you
Flask
hear us?
application, for us to perform
I don't think
anything
so.
on top of it, the first and foremost thing that we need to note, we need to observe and identify is that our particular Flask application is specific. Please remember, our particular Flask application is specific and it only performs operation when you hit an endpoint. That is, think about a website. Let's think about a website. In website, let's say dummy json.com slash cards. This particular website will only perform an application, will only give me the cart detail when I hit this web page using get request. Only then it will give me a response. Otherwise, it don't. Flask does just that. In Flask, we need to add some endpoints of the web page and we need to specify some request methods. Like, do we use a get request? Do you use post request? What do we use in order to get the response? And that's exactly what we're going to do now. Let's begin with that. For that purpose, we have a simple operation. Again, I'm starting with the most basic way to perform this. We're going to complicate it ahead in time. So please wait for just a few seconds before I continue ahead. All right. So going ahead, let's move on to this. Now, first part of this, when we start working on Flask application, as pointed out, we need to make sure that any operation we do on top of Flask applications, we have an endpoint that we are selecting, and we hit that endpoint to perform these applications. So let's create our first endpoint. Let's hit that endpoint and let's start performing operations one at a time. Right. So here, in our case, in order to create any route, you have a decorator called app.route. Again, just so you know, there's another concept within Python called, okay, I'm so sorry, I just saw this. Yes, Jenny, I'm so sorry, I couldn't hear you talking. I'm so sorry. Let me just check this. Okay, I think my speakers are not set proper. Sorry for that. Can you please try speaking now?
Okay, can you hear us now?
Yes, yes, I can. I'm so sorry for the minor issue.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah,
I put my question in the chat too. I was wondering what type of tasks that we should use Flask for.
all right. So Flask is pretty much a framework for mostly web applications, mostly. However, we use it for various other projects as well. I'll just give you a simple example. The idea of Flask is if you want to automate anything, for instance, and you want to automate it in such a way that you just send some JSON data to an endpoint and have it perform whatever operation you want, you basically can do this. In other words, um, it could become a web framework for you where you can hit a web page endpoint and have it return some information for you, it can become a local framework for you where you can, at any point of time, again, use an endpoint of Flask and have it perform operations so that you can use that data, response data later on, or any such thing. Or you can even make it as an endpoint where let it perform some operation. By the time you go to your computer, it would have done all the operation that you want. So you can access it remotely without being in front of your computer by making it accessible over the web as well. So there are a lot of things that we can do. We can add APIs to it. We can make microservices to it. You can make it um, you can use Flask to create your test cases, unit test and integration test cases, and so on. And given that it's one of the Python frameworks which is built in such a way that you can perform uh, or you can create your first Flask application on day one itself, it's very easy to use. So even if it's some data analytics that you need to do, let's say, for instance, you want to perform some data analytics on the go whenever you want to. Let's say a client says, hey, I've sent you the file. I just want you to perform some data analytics on it. You just have to upload that file to the endpoint of that Flask application. Flask application will do that operation and it can send you an email as a response, indicating that, hey, I've performed this operation and this is your response. Or it can just store that in a DB, or it can do whatever operation you want. So that's like the purpose of it. We use it for a varied set of operations, to be honest. Um, so yeah, that I hope that helps to an extent. We haven't done anything. We have just created a dummy app. We'll just do one small operation. Based on that, you will have an idea that we can do anything with it. All right. So yeah, with that, let's move ahead. I hope I've been able to answer your query meanwhile. Right. So
Yep,
moving ahead.
thank you.
Right. Thank you for that. Right. So moving ahead here, I'm just going to create a route. Now, please note, by default, Flask will run in your local computer. That is HTTP :/127.0.0.1 and within the port 5000. So this is the default port, and this is the default host IP in which it runs always. But you can change that if you want at any point of time by adding a parameter within run, which has host and port. You can change it at any point of time that you want. So yeah, that's there, but let's not worry about it. Our purpose is not to learn Flask. Our purpose is to learn, just use Flask to create an application for ourselves. It's not to learn Flask entirely. So I'm just going to create a simple route. Let's call this as /dummy. And you need to always specify what methods can we access this route with. Remember, whenever we accessed this dummyjson.com/cards, we access this with some kind of requests. We access this either with a GET request or POST request or so on. Currently, we are accessing it with GET request. Browser to show data on screen, we use GET request. So for that purpose, the methods in which we access this will be GET. If you want to access it with GET, POST, and PUT, and so on, you can do that. But for us, in our case, we are only going to use GET. And we just have to write a function. And whatever you write in this function, that is any statements written here, will be executed once the endpoint is accessed. Once you access this dummy endpoint, whatever you write here will execute. This could be literally anything you want to do. You can keep your PC on and you want to just hit this API while you're on the move so that by the time you reach office or by the time you reach home, you want some operation to be done instead of you having to open up your laptop and start this. So use Python to automate the entire thing. That's one way you can do that. In our case, I'm not going to do any operation on our first function. I'm just gonna return one simple dictionary, or rather, yeah, let's return dictionary. We'll change it to JSON data later on. The dictionary will have data, or the dictionary will have working is true. That's it. This is all I'm going to return. Simple. Let's run this now. When you rerun this, here's the idea. We have imported the Flask class. We have created an object of it. We are using run with that object. The moment you run this Python Flask application, this app will be active. And in this app, that is running in this particular URL, we have a route called dummy. So followed by this entire URL, we have dummy as an endpoint. And whenever we access this dummy endpoint with GET request, please note, browsers by default use GET requests. You can also use POST and other things whenever you want to access databases. Again, Flask becomes very important when you want to interact with databases. You're not going to directly interact with databases, right? You're going to use some other ways. That's where these methods are going to be important. I'll get to that later on. Let's not worry about it right now. Right now, let's assume browsers can show information on screen when we use GET request directly. Hence, I'm using GET request. When this dummy endpoint is hit, the function written below it will execute. That is the purpose of this at app.route. At app.route will remember this is the route. When this route is accessed, the immediate return function will be executed, and whatever the function is returning, we will return it back to whoever is accessing this endpoint. That's how it works. Let's try accessing that endpoint to begin with. So the endpoint at our end is 127.0.0.1 colon 5000 slash dummy. Once I access it, you can see here, it's giving me working is true. You can see this is the response that it has provided. That's it about Flask. That is what it does. In short, you send a request, you'll get a response. You don't have to necessarily get a response. You can send a request, have it perform like some 15-minute long operation, like go through some PDF files, perform some operation, and get some data back and work around it. And then instead of returning the message back to you, because you can't have your phone or laptop open for 50 minutes waiting for response, instead of returning a message 50 minutes later, return a message immediately that your operation will be performed, and then keep performing that operation for 50 minutes, however long it takes. And once it is done, send an email or send you a tweet that this operation is done, and so on. A lot of things can be done. This is um, quite a wonderful framework to explore when you look into Python, just for our reference. So yeah, just wanted to point this out. So yeah, with this, if there are any queries on Flask so far, please let me know, because this is all that we're going to learn within Flask. I'm not going to go in depth about Flask. Maybe we spent 15 minutes to 25, 30 minutes in Flask, and this is all that we're going to learn. We're going to use this logic to create a real life application ahead. That's the purpose. So please let me know if there are any queries. We'll take it ahead. If there are no queries, we'll move ahead. I'll just wait for a few seconds. If you want to try it out and make it run within your local PC meanwhile.
So when we run the code, do we also go to that 127, that link,
Yes.
or do we have a different one?
So this is the default links. The idea is that this is called the local host or the home link. And this link is not publicly accessible. It's not publicly accessible over the internet. So in my PC, 121.0.0.1 colon 5000 is going to access my own PC's IP, my own PC's homepage. In your PC, it's going to access your PC's homepage and so on. So that's going to be unique for us. The URL will be the same for us. But when you hit that URL, you'll be accessing your own Flask server that is deployed in your PC. You will not be accessing anybody else's Flask server. If you want to access, or if you want to make your Flask server accessible over the internet, there are other ways to do that, which we can see later on. But for now, let's have the assumption that we are accessing this Flask server in our own PC alone. So if you try it with your mobile phone, that won't work. Just for a reference, unless your mobile phone and your PC are connected to the same Wi-Fi, then it works. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves.
So
I hope that helps.
I'm using Hanover laptop. So when I try that dummy link, it says it can be reached. So I'm not sure whether that just Hanover firewall thing. But
Okay. We can just give a check if you would be able to share the screen. We can look into if that's fine with you.
I can screens, but I can give you a screenshot.
That
But
should be great.
if it just Hanover firewall thing, then I guess we can.
Are you using a virtual machine by any chance?
Oh yes. So is
All
it
right.
the 127 doesn't work for a virtual machine?
So the idea is that if you're using a virtual machine, you need to access this web page in the virtual machine itself, because this Flask server will be locally accessible within the system in which you're coding. So if you're using a virtual machine and your browser is um, in your out of your virtual machine, for instance, then it's not possible, just for reference.
Okay. Thank you. I guess we can
Right.
move on.
Right. But you have, let's say, I'm sorry, you have VS Code within the virtual machine, right? If I'm not wrong.
Right.
Okay, in that case, there's another way you can access it. You can just go to extensions and search for Thunder Client. There should be an extension called Thunder Client over there. I already have it installed, and it's enabled. You can just check if you already have it installed, or it's by default installed, or you might need to install it. So this Thunder Client, which is available here with this flash icon, if you just click on it, you should be able to connect over to these endpoints within the virtual machine as well, just for reference. So once you click on this Thunder Client icon, you can just click on a new request. And in this new request, you can send the request here. That is http://127.001:5000/dummy. And it's just a GET request, simple, just send it. Okay, there seems to be some error saying bad request. Oh, yeah, that's because we have HTTPS. It's not secure. Ours is not a secure server, right? It's just going to be HTTP. There we go. Now we get the response. So if it's running in the virtual machine, you can try Thunder Client, a new request, just change the URL and click send, and it should work as expected. Hopefully that helps for now as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, thanks a lot. Right, so moving ahead, let's go on to the next part of this. This is the basic idea of how you access, let's say, a simple Flask application, how you create and work around with a very simple Flask application. One thing you can notice is, even though I'm returning a dictionary here, by default, Flask converts it into a JSON data, and I'm able to see it in JSON data here. Now, in our case, now that we are able to see this, now that we are able to look into this, we can move ahead. One thing that I just want to point out here is, I think I've made a mistake by saying what I said. We are sending the dictionary, which means Flask will send back the dictionary, but it's the application here that is taking it as JSON. However, if you want to explicitly send JSON data alone, there's one way to do that. Within Flask, we have a function called JSONify, all you have to do is whatever dictionary is there, just wrap it in JSONify function and then send it. That's it. It will by default take the dictionary content, convert it to a JSON data, and then send it. So even if some browser is not able to understand the dictionary and convert it to a JSON data, it should still be able to perform it. So this is a common practice we use whenever we work around it, just for our reference. Now, let's move away from this simple app.py, and I'm going to create a new file, or rather than a file, I'll create a new folder called controller. Now, here's where things are going to get slightly tricky because we're going to try to integrate between multiple Python files. And this is going to be a theme in every real world application. So please note this. There's going to be a common theme across every real world application we use. We're going to link multiple files. The app that we run here will be used somewhere else in another file, or the logger that we create in one file will not be used only in that one file. That logger will be used in multiple files. So we have a lot of integrated variables that will come up. So that's the next thing we're going to start to learn. That's the next thing we're going to start to add up. So let's go ahead to controller, and I'll create a file called controller.py. Now remember, as we have seen earlier, controller.py is your application layer. This is the file that users will interact with. Whoever wants to use your application, that particular user will interact with this exact file. That's how it works. So all our application layer content, whatever it is, we're going to write here. And once we create this first application today, we'll have a much better idea on how things work and how things behave when you want to create your own application. But prior to that, I think we have also reached the hour mark. Do you guys want to take a small break of 15 minutes and be back? Would that be feasible? All right. So, all right. In that case, let's take a small break and let's join back by 2:45 p.m. Eastern time.